Hey everybody. With the month of February quickly approaching, it was perhaps inevitable that the seemingly perennial conversations and debates over the appropriateness of the institution of Black History Month would begin again anew pretty soon. Well, it's already gotten off to an interesting start. Former movie star Stacy Dash actually kicked off the proceedings a few days ago when she said on Fox News, in response to the whole Oscars so white controversy, that she thinks that institutions like BET and Black History Month really shouldn't exist. To quote, she said, "We have to make up our minds. Either we want to have segregation or integration. If we don't want segregation, then we need to get rid of channels like BET and the BET Awards and the Image Awards, where you're only awarded if you're black. If it were the other way around, we would be up in arms. It's a double standard." She went on to say, "There shouldn't be a Black History Month. We're Americans, period." Ms. Dash is well off her rocker on this one. A lot of other commentators have already pointed out some of the more glaring flaws in her analysis, such as it is. But when it comes to the larger issue of double standards, I think that Stacy Dash has got the whole thing twisted. The real double standard that I see when it comes to the whole issue of Black History Month and other similar black community institutions is not about whether we would be up in arms if white people were to do similar things. I think the real double standard is that people of Stacy Dash's more conservative political bent tend to be very hypocritical when they criticize black community institutions such as BET and Black History Month, because you don't hear those same critics condemning expressions of ethnic pride coming from white ethnic minority groups. When's the last time you heard anyone, whether it's Stacy Dash or anyone who thinks more or less the way she does, condemning Jewish community institutions? When's the last time you heard people telling Italian Americans that they shouldn't celebrate Columbus Day as a celebration of Italian American heritage? That they should just treat their history as part of American history and be done with it? When's the last time you heard people speaking out against St. Patrick's Day on the grounds that it somehow segregates Irish Americans away from other Americans? You don't generally hear those criticisms or condemnations in society at large coming from any quarters. Yet for some reason, when non-white ethnic minority groups, such as the black community, seek to preserve and celebrate our heritages, all of a sudden, a dark cloud of suspicion arises. I don't get it. I don't think it makes any sense at all. I think that's the real double standard that's at play when it comes to practices and institutions like BET or Black History Month. If there were such a thing as an Italian American History Month, do you really think non-Italian Americans would object to that? I know I wouldn't. I also know that I wouldn't have a problem with a hypothetical Jewish entertainment television. I remember a Jewish high school classmate of mine raising that issue with me once. She was saying, "What is up with BET?" And I was like, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And she said, if people like me were to establish a JET, you wouldn't have a problem with that? And I said, no, I wouldn't. What's wrong with that? As it is, the Jewish community has plenty of its own institutions and does plenty to celebrate and perpetuate its own unique cultural heritage. And I say more power to them. Good for you. Way to go. Keep up the good work. If anything, I view communities such as the Jewish community as role models in that area. I think they provide a shining example for the rest of us of not only how to preserve distinct minority cultures within a larger society, but also how to pull off the balancing act of celebrating those particular heritages while still remaining a committed part of the larger society. I remember having this discussion when I was in law school. A Caucasian schoolmate of mine pointed out that that a lot of different nations, in the strictest academic sense of that word, communities with distinct cultures and heritages, a shared history, a shared ancestry in many cases, not necessarily countries, but nations in the sociological sense of that word. Distinct nations often overlap with each other, and individuals can often belong to more than one nation at a time. African Americans, I think, are perfect examples of that. African Americans, I would say, belong to at least two nations. The African American nation in particular, and the larger American nation in general. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything inherently problematic about it. And I don't see that those loyalties are necessarily divided, especially when you consider that the entire African American nation, as the name itself clearly indicates, exists within the umbrella of, or underneath the umbrella of the larger American identity anyway. So why is it so hard for so many people to accept that African Americans constitute a nation unto themselves, a distinct group with its own ancestry, its own heritage, its own story, its own history? But at the same time, that history, of course, is part of the larger American story, the larger American experience, and that one can belong to both of those groups and be proud of both of those groups and feel fortunate and blessed to belong to both of those groups without any self contradiction and without any divided or conflicting loyalties. I don't see why African Americans can't embrace and celebrate and perpetuate their particular African American heritage, which is distinct from the heritages of other Americans, but also celebrate what they have in common with other Americans as well. That is a massive and glaring double standard. If Jewish Americans can celebrate their membership in the Jewish nation and the American nation, and if they can celebrate that heritage without any conflict between the two, then why can't African Americans do the same thing? Why? And why is it that when African Americans seek to preserve their heritage, so many people are so quick to accuse them of segregation? I think it's time for people to recognize that celebrating one's peculiar cultural or ethnic heritage is not in any way incompatible with viewing oneself as a proud American or celebrating what a person has in common with people of other backgrounds generally. People should be like trees. You need roots in order to survive, but you also need branches. I know I see myself that way. I'm very proud to be a black man, to be, a Trinidadian descendant. I'm very proud of those heritages. I'm very proud to belong to those groups. I should say, not proud per se, but I feel very fortunate and blessed to belong to those groups. And I'm very glad of it. And I certainly plan to raise any children I eventually have with a close connection to those heritages. But at the same time, that doesn't stop me from feeling fortunate to have grown up in Canada, to have grown up in Montreal. And should I ever become a U.S. citizen, it wouldn't stop me from from feeling very fortunate to be a part of the American story and the American nation. And it would just all be a part of that general practice of staying in touch with my roots, but also branching out and experiencing and being a part of and interacting with other cultures as well. If I can do it, folks, so can you, and so can African Americans, and I think that is what most African Americans do day in, day out, including those who watch BET and who observe Black History Month. And as for this business about, oh, well, if the shoe were on the other foot, if there were a White History Month or a white entertainment television, we wouldn't accept it. That's the wrong analogy. A more apt analogy would be to compare Black History Month to, say, again, a Jewish History Month or an Italian American History Month, and I don't think anyone would have any problem with that. As for a White History Month, well, aside from the point that many observers have already made, which is that there already are effectively 11 White History Months. Since, white people are the dominant group in American society, we already see plenty of celebrations of white, historical heritage, white history and heritage and so on. In addition to that, white people have never been oppressed and persecuted on a wide scale as white people on account of their skin color. Certainly not in the United States, certainly not in American society. So there's no practical need for white Americans as white Americans to celebrate their heritage as such. Now, they're free to celebrate their heritage as, they're members of different smaller groups, white ethnic groups, and no one objects to that. And of course, they're free to celebrate their heritage as Americans, but start talking about White History Month without irony, and yes, that will arouse suspicion. And I think it's justified suspicion because it just so happens most of the people who talk about white pride or white heritage without irony happen to be white supremacists. I think that's the real double standard when it comes to Black History Month. I just wish more people like Stacy Dash were aware of it.